In 9.5, we discuss how you integrate tables and graphs into your reports. Business reports often rely on numbers and data graphics. Tables and graphs are the best tools for communicating these numbers. Have you ever read a complicated description of information and then looked at a table or graph and thought, now I get it? Well, designing tables and graphs provide a picture of data and allow you to see the relationship and trends much more clearly than just text alone. However, creating effective data graphics and integrating them into your text is not always easy. It involves a multi-step process. Tables and graphs represent data in different ways. Tables arrange data in columns and rows, allowing you to read down or across to see different relationships. Graphs illustrate the relationship among tables and variable sets of data as an image or shape drawn in a relationship, and will have two axes. Because they represent data in different ways, tables and graphs have different uses. In Figure 9.15, this is an illustration, the same data that was presented in text, graph, and form table. If you can see, it is difficult to understand the significance of numbers that are embedded in the paragraph. The table, however, makes it very easy to extract the values. However, the table does not help you see the specific patterns and trends. Although the graph does not provide exact values, it highlights trends and the relationships by showing the data as a shape. Choosing the best graph type can be tricky. If a graph is the best way to display your data, make sure you choose the graph that most effectively communicates your message. Although many graph types are available, most business documents rely on the core set of 9 graphic types as illustrated in 9.16 in the textbook, along with some other variations. You can create all of these graphs with commonly variable spreadsheets and graphing software. So for each graph type in 9.16, there's a little statement of purpose, an illustration, and best practices for designing the graph. These best practices, which are explained in more detail in the next section, will help you communicate meaningful data and information clearly. Whether you're designing graphs or tables, follow the core true principles of Edward Truft, one of the most famous information designers in the world. Truft recommends eliminating all distractions that do not help the audience understand the data. For tables, this means eliminating or minimizing all unnecessary grid lines and borders. For graphs, it means eliminating anything that exists only for decoration. In Figure 9.17, which illustrates graphing terminology, and the checklist in the textbook for advice about designing graphs, the numbers on the checklist correspond to the numbered elements in the figure. Checklist for effective table design. Like graphs, tables should be designed so the audience can easily see the data without any distraction from content or format. Follow these simple guidelines, which are illustrated in Figure 9.18. Title each table. Arrange the columns and rows in a meaningful order. Label columns and rows effectively. Eliminate heavy grid lines. Use shading strategically. You can use light shading to highlight data or distinguish alternative rows. Notice how the last column is highlighted in this figure to emphasize current value or total. Remove unnecessary repetition from cells. You do not need to include dollar signs or percentages in cells in a column. That can look far too busy and distract from the data. Align numbers to the right. Keep decimal points aligned. Use consistent format in decimal places along all values. See the example, value of investment column. Align text to the left. Text is easier to read when it's left aligned. For example, see the CD length column. Do not center content unless every row in that column contains the same number of characters. In the renewable column in Figure 9.18, Y and N are centered because each entry is only one character long. In Date Opened column, the dates are centered because they are written in identical format and have identical number of characters. You can also center the text in the interest rate column because character lengths are identical. However, if one interest rate were 10% or larger, you would need to right align the numbers to make the values align. In a report or other document, text and data displays need to work together to communicate a full message. The graph or table represents the data, and the text contextualizes and interprets the data. Use text to explain to the audience what they're looking at and highlight the key points so they can understand the data. In Figure 9.19 in this text, the version A simply repeats data that can be seen in the graph itself. Version B is better because it generates from the data and identifies specific patterns. The text also uses the data to support an argument. Follow these guidelines to integrate the verbal and visual elements of your documents. Label your number figures and tables sequentially throughout the report. You may either number figures or tables in their individual sequences, Figure 1, Figure 2, Table 1, Table 2, etc., or you may combine tables and figures into one list, calling them exhibits, Exhibit 1, Exhibit 2, and so on. Refer to the audience to the graphic within the text, using the figure or table number as illustrated in version A and version B of the paragraphs, as illustrated also throughout the book. Place the graphic as close as possible over the reference. Do not place graphics before the mentioned text because that will often confuse a reader. Tell the audience what to notice in the graphic. In a data graphic, where the important information trends are, and in a picture and illustration, where they should focus their attention. In a diagram, make sure your audience knows how to read the relationships and answer the questions that accompany the graphic. Design the graph to be self-explanatory. Even though you've provided explanation in the text, provide enough labeling on the graph so that any description or figure name or caption can be read and understood simply by looking at the graphic without reading the accompanying text. This follows a reader's ability to scan the document and derive a good deal of information simply from looking at the graphics. There are ethics in representing data ethically. Notice the chart in front of you. Graphics can mislead in many ways. Because ethical representations of data is so important, many organizations have developed guidelines to guide their ethics. The guidelines displayed in this section of the textbook are among the most important to follow in business communications. The graphs on the left are potentially misleading. The versions on the right correct the errors. Finally, in 9.6, how should you document your research? Documenting or citing sources is a key part of writing in all academia and professional writing. Appropriate documentation serves many functions. It adds credibility to your writing. It strengthens your argument. It helps your audience locate information mentioned in your report, and it helps demonstrate that you are ethical. If you acknowledge all your sources, no one will accuse you of plagiarism, which is presenting others' ideas as your own. You need to document or give credit for any information or opinion that originally found in another source. This includes exact quotations, any phrases, sentences, paragraphs, or even single distinctive words that are taken from any source. A paraphrase. A paraphrase is a version of someone else's original content, but in your own words. Cite paraphrased content by using the author's name and the year of publication, including a page number, which is required in some documentation styles and recommended in others. In a summary is a brief version of another person's point of view. Specific facts or data. You also need to cite every piece of information that is not common knowledge or the result of not your own research. This includes opinions, arguments, speculations, as well as facts, details, figures, and statistics. Writers are often confused about what is common knowledge. Tables, graphs, photographs, and other graphics. If you copy a visual from another source and place it into your document, you need to cite the source for that visual. You do this by including the citation in your caption or directly under the visual, such as Figure 9.20 in the textbook, which refers as APA format for citing graphics. Preparing your documentation. In a formal report, acknowledge this report by sources 3 ways. You may use all of these acknowledgments in a report. Citations. This simply means that every time you use material from another source in your text, you add a citation. Your citation may be from a form of a footnote, an endnote, a parenthetical citation inserted directly for your reference. The form you use will depend on the requirements of your organization and school. Text references. Do not rely exclusively on citations or orient readers to your sources. Instead, introduce cited materials by explicitly referring to the source within your text. See how this requirement is illustrated in Figure 9.20 in the textbook, which uses APA format for the citing graphics. References list or bibliography. Provide a list of sources at the end of every research report. Each item in the list must include enough information for readers to find this documentation on their own. APA, MLA, and CMS each have different names for this list. APA calls this references. MLA calls it works cited. CMS offers you two options. If you're using footnotes and endnotes, it would be a bibliography. If you're using parenthetical citations, title the page References. Do not wait to add citations, text references, or references entries until after you've written your entire report. Waiting to add citations and documentation can often lead to two problems. First, you may inadvertently omit required information that will be hard to find later and waste time. And second, you may forget what you've quoted and unintentionally plagiarize. In summary, no matter what company you work for, you're likely to write reports. The term reports refers to a wide range of documents that provide information or analysis to answer business questions. Reports may be written in many forms, as emails, memo letters, formal manuscripts, report decks, or web pages. Many reports also include tables, graphs, diagrams, and documentation of research. The guidelines in this chapter help you manage all this material and present it in ways that will be clear to your audience, whether they read your report now or in the future.